give a couple of announcements, and then I'll hand it back over to you, Kathy. But okay, I think that's going now. Perfect. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on kind of a dreary day in Indianapolis. I know our weather's kind of been back and forth here, so I hope that it's nice wherever you are. But a couple announcements before we jump in of just some reminders for our Indiana accredited and nationally accredited communities. Don't forget that quarterly reporting is due on April 15th. So, if you haven't started working on that, definitely encourage you to be thinking about that, be starting to work on that. The other thing is if you are a new executive director, so if you were hired after May of 2023, then we would love for you to join our executive director training on May 23rd. And so I'm just going to make sure everyone's muted. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so that's going to be a really great day, be able to give all of our new directors just time to connect with one another. We'll dig in a little bit deeper to some helpful things that might be good for you in your role. We'll also bring in some experienced directors to talk, so it'll be a really, fun day. So make sure you register for that. And other than that, that's really my main couple announcements. So we're really excited, as always, to have Kathy La Plante speaking with us today about the very, very fun topic of succession planning for your board and for your staff. And so this is something that we know as we've been out and about working with you all that I know many of you have said, like, we don't really have a succession plan in place for our board or our staff. And so we definitely want that to be something that in your organizations you work to implement. And so Kathy's going to kind of talk through some best practices with that today, and we'll have some resources for you in the follow-up as well. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Kathy.
Great. Thanks, Abby, and good morning, everybody. This is kind of going to be a succession planning 101 for you because it's a lot to think about. And often you are so busy with events, fundraising, and other activities, we're not spending much, if any, time on thinking about succession planning. So this one is for boards, for executive directors, and I asked the question here, are you ready for change, the expected and the unexpected? And so just wanted to start off with sort of an overview of what we're going to do, and then Abby's going to launch a little poll with a few questions that I have. But really, succession planning is that process of identifying and developing leaders to succeed your current leaders, and that includes both staff and your board of directors. And it's really just being proactive about investing in the pipeline of leadership that you're going to have in your program going forward. And I know it's easy for us to sort of put that aside and say, well, we'll find those new board members we need when we get to that point at the end of the year, when we finally know that we're going to have 3 vacant seats, and we'll find some of friends or people to fill those slots. And so we really want you to think about how your program is addressing any of the issues that I'm talking about today. So take notes. Abby's going to send you the handouts after this is over. Abby, I found that one typo, so I'll print a new set. Hopefully I won't have too many more here. But I want you to just think about where your program is at with this process as you go through. So here are the questions that Abby is going to launch in a poll. And so let's see if it gets into the poll, Abby. So the first question you're going to answer is how long your executive director has been in place with your program. That's going to give me an idea of if there's a lot of transition going on in Indiana in that position. The second question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that your program operations will continue if your executive director left this morning? Not just in, that you're able to pull off the events, but really everything that encompasses your organization, from fundraising to relationships to managing staff. The third question is, do you know who the officers for your organization will be in 2025? So I know you all know who your officers are now, but do you know, is it set? Who will be your officers next year? Simple yes or no on that one. And then number 4 question is, do you have a waiting list of people who want to serve on your board of directors? Yes or no? Are there people who are just eager to become part of your program? So I'm going to
So
give you a
yes, if
minute.
people aren't, I see people are responding, so that's good. So it's all in the chat if you're not seeing the polls that she's mentioning. So just go in there and you should be able to, or they should pop up on your screen, one of those two, and
So I'm going to just
answer those.
wait a minute until all of you can answer those questions. And then Abby, maybe I'll move ahead and you can give me a rundown at some point on how everybody feels. I'd be especially interested in how number 2 question is coming in and how confident everybody feels in what's going to happen with your program operations if your executive director left, say, right after this webinar. Nobody should do that, but we'll see. Oopsie, moved in. My mouse is moving here. Are they still coming in?
I think so. Yeah. So it looks like so far on number 1, most people are at 1 to 2 years. Their executive director has been in place with them, so that's about 50%. The next is 3 to 5 years, and then 5 to 10 years being so we don't have any less than 1 year right now on that.
Super.
And then on a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of the confidence, if the executive director left, we've got, let's see, highest is 33% at like a 6, so a little above somewhat confident, somewhere in the middle. We have a few at, 1 or 2 at 7 and 8. And then we have one at not confident at all, and then another person at like a 3. So, and then it looks like 71% of people said they do know who their officers will be in 2025. 28% don't know. And then a waiting list of people to serve on the board of directors looks like 71% said no, and then 28% said yes.
Okay.
So,
Well, those are good numbers. I'm glad to hear you have some uh, longevity in the executive director positions, and that many of you do feel like you probably have some of the things in place for succession planning. So take notes, and we'll talk about some of the other things that you might want to talk about in regards to succession planning. But, the important thing is that we want to learn how we can keep our chain of leadership together when there is transition, right? So that something doesn't break and something relied totally on the person that was in charge or the board of directors in order to ensure the longevity of the program. So we want to keep that in place. So there's really 3 scenarios that we look at for succession planning. There's strategic leadership development. That is what comes from your board of directors and through the committees. There's emergency succession planning. If your staff got hit by a bus or wins that $1.1 billion Powerball jackpot tonight, you might choose to leave right away. Or it could be a disaster hits your downtown or even your Main Street office. I had one community that their Main Street office burned down and they lost everything, including all their databases and all their records. It all lived within that office. So you might have those kinds of emergencies. And then there is the defined departure when somebody announces their retirement and they're going to be leaving in 6 months, or they give their notice they'll be gone in 2 weeks. So we can better plan a little bit around that. So we're going to talk about all of those areas and thinking about, who needs to be included when you're doing leadership succession planning. And obviously the board of directors and executive director, but you also might have city staff or elected officials in play, especially where at least we have Main Street programs in other parts of the country where Main Street is housed within the city. There may also be other organizations, especially if you're in a dual role organization where you might be a chamber Main Street or a Main Street chamber. Those would be people who might be involved in the planning as well. So we really want to think about how we evolve the leaders, not just seat filling board members, but actually leaders who will help you as executive directors and as other board members accomplish the mission of the organization. So we want to identify our future leaders and really make sure we have activities in place that is really going to strengthen our leadership capacity. So the future, we don't know exactly what's out there, but creating a plan and just having things in place is really going to help you be more effective and intentional in recruiting people for the program. One of the things I wanted to cover first was the stages of Main Street programs, because this has a lot to do with the types of leaders and their skill set as you go through different stages of the Main Street program growth. So there are 3 stages that Main Street programs go through. There's the catalyst phase, the growth phase, and the maintenance phase. And communities can move forward or backward out of these phases depending on turnover in the leadership of the program. Your program might get into the growth phase where lots of reinvestment happens and you have a bit of a track record to speak about. But if the executive director changes and things get slowed down, a community might actually fall back into the catalyst phase and need to build up its credibility and partnerships, et cetera. So I wanted to give you a little bit more detail about each of those 3 areas when you think about the development of both the executive director position and your board. So this article, or you can read more about them, is in our Revitalizing Main Street Handbook. That's available to all of you as members of Main Street America. So you can look into that if you want a little bit more information. But I do have a summary here. So the catalyst phase, that builds collaborative partnerships. That's when you're just starting out. So most of you are not brand new Main Street programs, but it really is that beginning phase where communities saw Main Street working someplace else. They wanted to be part of that. So that catalyst phase is when we're building our partnerships, we're establishing a presence in the community. It's characterized by enthusiasm. We're going to be able to do this, high hopes. Yet there's a little skepticism. There's people will say, well, we tried that. We don't want to do that again. And it really is organizing for the investment that is to come. So when we first start our Main Street programs, we have a lot of things to sell to the community to do to show them that it really works. And so when a community is in the catalyst phase, here are the indicators that show you're moving into that growth phase. You have design management systems in place, that you're offering design assistance, facade grants. You have a historic district commission that is protecting the resources. You're doing strategic thinking. You've had a transformation strategy visit, and you're thinking about succession planning. You've built up organizational credibility. People know who you are. They turn to you for participation and solutions. And also, there's a good understanding of the district's importance to the economic health of the community as well. And then you get into the growth phase. So this is probably where many of your programs are. You might also be in the maintenance phase, but during the growth phase, you begin to tackle tougher problems that investment is starting to really soar in the district. People have confidence, so they're spending money rehabbing buildings, and making investments. And along with the visionaries at the catalyst level, Main Street now needs seasoned volunteer leadership who possess specific skills to help you get through this more advanced phase. They might have expertise in development financing. They might have political assets. They might be able to provide that marketing direction to stimulate investment. The challenges that communities have during that growth phase is having a comprehensive economic strategy. Again, that's that transformation strategy, trying to raise the capital to get those bigger, tougher projects done, and identifying issues and barriers that are preventing full utilization of the district. That's why our more mature communities are working with their cities to put vacancy ordinances in place, et cetera. What are those barriers? And then when communities finally go from that growth phase and they're looking at going into that management or maintenance phase, here are some of the things that we're looking at. You have about 70% of your buildings have been renovated. Your ground floor vacancy rate is somewhere between 5 to 8%. Your upper story vacancy rate is under 20%. The public is aware of the district's importance to the community and their quality of life, and you've made headway in dealing with regulatory issues. So the catalyst phase usually lasts 2 to 4 years. The growth phase lasts anywhere from 4 to 12 years. And then our communities get into the maintenance phase. And that's when you're, functioning like a shopping center with management. You have business transition planning, you have maintenance of the district to take care of those murals you did 20, 25 years ago need to be redone. Your banners are replaced a lot. It's really going back to take care of what you've really established as a healthy downtown. But we always have to have ongoing marketing. You have a strong brand for your program as well. And typical characteristics when you're in this maintenance phase is that you serve as a contractor to the city, providing certain services. Maybe you're the parking managers or you're the marketing for the city. Your staff will often grow at this phase as well because you've been able to take on more activities and events and things that are expanding the reach of your program. Your leaders will redefine the mission to reflect. There's another little typo. I'm going to fix that one too. To reflect the progress that you've made. You're no longer perceived by the general public as being an economic need. Your downtown seems really healthy, and your district supports a broader range of uses than it did when you started the program. And that maintenance phase lasts from whenever you get to it until the life of your program. So you think about the leadership you need at all of those phases, because at that catalyst phase, we just have to have the visionaries and the believers. And then the skill sets seem to get more specific. What are the issues that you need to deal with? Is it housing? Is it transportation? Are we, fighting for the city support, nonstop? Then we need people with that political, social capital to help us with that. So you're going to need leaders at each of the phases of Main Street. I think when I was a local executive director, when my program started up, I had, the bank presidents and the industry presidents because they could help raise the money, build our credibility. But when we got into sort of the more technical side of things, they stepped aside in favor of volunteers who had that other expertise. So we want to make sure that we're creating a plan that is more intentional about recruiting people to become part of our leadership and program. So it's important to have consensus among the executive director and your leadership team about leadership development and succession planning. So you have to have time to discuss this, whether you do it at an annual retreat or you set aside a board meeting to talk specifically about this. We have to have our expectations about what will happen. Mapping out that vision for a future leadership team. We have to understand what our organization strategy here is so that we can work with current staff and with our board of directors to really map out what we want to look like. So that's that part of identifying who the future leaders might be, and then figure out how do we develop them through that. And that's why we've always talked about the committee level. The committees is where we develop our leaders. We start to get them introduced to Main Street. They take on some responsibilities. They love to celebrate what their accomplishments were. We have to think about that pipeline, not just our immediate need is 40 volunteers for our car show. Where will those 40 volunteers fall in our leadership development? Who stood out? And so we have to make that part of the planning for our work plans, is really to make sure we're doing that. And then wherever you have gaps and you need new talent, we have to be able to identify those and use those going forward, so that we might start reaching out into areas we didn't think we needed help with before, but we might have, new residents moving into the community that have wonderful amounts of talent that we can pull in. And then just make sure we're monitoring and improving the process of developing leaders. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that as well. And really, figure out what your best practices are. Where are those volunteers coming from? How are they approached? What do they need for training from us to make sure they stay in our pipeline of engaged people? As I said, because sometimes we're more caught up in using volunteers and not really thinking about them as being our next leaders for the program. So it all starts with your board member job description, right? And I know Indiana Main Street has great resources for you to tap into. I also sent this to Abby to share with you as well. But one of the best ways to get good leaders is to set high expectations for them. We don't want to just go out to people who you want on your board and say, will you come on our board? And you haven't given them a job description, haven't gone through what you need out of them as an active board member. The higher you set those expectations, the more apt they are that they're going to perform. So be clear in the needs that you have for them before they get on the board, and make sure that that is just emphasized. We can't, somebody to come on your board and then you talk about fundraising, they go, whoa, I didn't know I was supposed to be engaged in fundraising. So we have to do that screening before they come onto the board, right? So a couple of thoughts that I have as far as things that you put in that really will help you with strong leadership is to have in there that they should be making an annual either membership contribution or donor, if you don't use the term membership, which I prefer you don't, but if they, through their business and personally. And I say that because a small business owner in your downtown, their personal contribution is the same as their business. But if you have a banker on your board and they bring a contribution from the bank, we hope that board member is also making a personal contribution. But the most important point of all of these, I think, here is that when they're talked to about coming on your board, they should be told that they should be willing to be president of your organization. And if they are not, then you probably should not consider them to be a board member. Everyone on your board should be willing to be the board chair if asked. And so they're paying closer attention to how the person ahead of them is running the board meeting. They're paying attention to Robert's Rules of Order. And they know that they're not just there warming a seat or to observe for their own interests in the downtown. So making sure that everyone on the board understands that they could be called upon at any time to be a officer or leader of the organization. I encourage everyone to have a nominating committee. The board members can, review that, or the board members who serve on that should also review your bylaws every year to make sure you're in compliance with those. But that nominating committee's job is to look at who do we need on the board, what are the skill sets, and to have those conversations with potential candidates for the board. in advance of their even accepting whether or not they'd like to be placed on the slate for nomination to the board. Same thing with people that you have who are renewing terms. Most of you have 3-year terms, and then they can renew for another 3 years. But that's not automatic. It shouldn't be automatic. At the end of their first 3-year term, the nominating committee would have a conversation with them, see if they're still committed to the program, what their goals and what they'd like to see happen during their next 3-year term. So to have those conversations. Also having policies and procedures manuals in place. That's going to help with transition of your staff when that comes along. So that should be something your board takes on. And also just making sure you have money for board members to go to trainings, to go to your preservation conference in Madison this October, or to go to any in-person trainings that Indiana offers to its communities. I've also seen a number of communities that have done these affirmation of services with their board members. This is something that, again, if you want high performance from your leaders, is just a reminder of what they signed up to do. This is an example from Washington, Missouri. And every year at their sort of review meeting and retreat, they read through this, they all agree to it again, they all sign on the same day that says, yes, I am making this commitment to, not just be engaged in the meetings, but to step up and lead a project, to give to the organization, to help out at our major events, and to stay informed about the Main Street program. All these small little steps help to cultivate your leaders to want to stay with you. They know that you're in need of their leadership, but they also know that they're in it with the other board members. And if they're all sort of making this commitment, it's really a nice example of how boards come together. I also found this from Joan Gary, who runs the nonprofit leadership lab. I've been in her class. She came up with a list of 10 reasons to join a nonprofit board. So if you have to sell anybody on the idea of joining your board and becoming a leader for your program, you can share these with them. You're going to learn patience, because projects take a long time on Main Street. They're going to learn how to ask for money, because you're going to train them, and Indiana Main Street's going to train them. You'll have experiences that enrich your resume. You'll meet interesting people and add to your sphere of influence. You will learn to play nice in the sandbox. We know not everybody doesn't agree on everything, but we learn to be better players when we are listening to others. You will learn to appreciate assets and liabilities, and that's, for real, because they have to learn how to read your financial statement and understand how to run a program. This one she threw in just to see if people were paying attention. You'll have another excuse to skip the gym because you're involved in Main Street. You're going to get your workout planting flowers. You will learn how to run an effective meeting of people who don't work for you. You'll stretch your intellectual and emotional muscles. Again, Main Street's great about that. And you'll fall more in love with your community, downtown, and organization. So we never want you to have to present to anybody that you're in a desperate situation to recruit people to your board of directors or committees. There are so many benefits. People are healthier when they volunteer their time. That is a medical fact. And so we can lay out all these reasons and have good reasons why people should join your board. So it isn't just what they can offer to you. What can you offer to them as somebody who is coming in and giving and stepping up to be a leader for your organization, either at the committee level or at the board level? So don't forget that they're getting something out of the experience as well. If
Hey,
you do it,
Kathy,
yes,
there was a question, if that's okay,
sure.
if I throw it out
Yeah,
to you so that
absolutely.
so Abby Huff was saying, how would you suggest, you know, tactfully asking board members that are not being very active to leave the board, or like those who have turned out to like step down if they haven't been that good of a board member?
That's an excellent question. And I learned some of this by experience. And I know I could have made a major mistake because in my experience, I had a board member who happened to also be on the city council, but he was never coming to our meetings, which were at 7:30 on the first Wednesday of the month. And he was also serving on my economic restructuring committee at the time. It used to be called that. And I wanted to go give him I needed to get him off the board because he wasn't showing up. And I wanted to go have that conversation just to say, hey, will you get off the board and just stay on the committee? And I went and had that conversation with him myself. He ran a bar in our downtown. And then it was sort of like after I got in and he kind of looked at me funny and I thought, I shouldn't be doing this. My board chair should be doing this. Someone from my nominating committee should be doing this, not the executive director who goes before the city council to ask for funding. So I think, again, using that nominating committee, you've got records of what their attendance has been. If you have that job description and you have somebody sit down with them and say, well, we see you haven't been able to come to the meetings or attend any of our major events. And we just think that maybe a better role for you is to stay within a committee or just volunteer for a project. But we really need somebody who has more time to be involved. But that message needs to come from either the board chair or somebody who's on the nominating committee. But I was reading somebody's review through accreditation, and they said our board is very aggressive at adhering to their board member expectations. And they removed 2 people from their board. And I thought that's great because so many boards are so hesitant about doing that. They don't want to offend anybody. But I think it's just, the smart thing to do is somebody needs to have a conversation. Don't remove them maybe right away, but somebody on the board needs to talk to the underperforming board people to say, either get more involved. Would you like to, help me do this or that? Or is there a reason that you're not coming to the board meetings? And just say, for the health of our organization, we need to have more active people and find a place where they can land. Is there a reason they got engaged with the program? So I'd have leadership do that and not the executive director doing that. If you have a transition, I think it's always a good time to say, what are the most critical issues for your board and your organization, right? So that, again, we can fill in the gaps. Is your mission and are your accomplishments well known in the city? If not, what can we do to make improvements? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. And have you shown that it's prestigious to serve on your board of directors? I think that's always a real key thing, that your board members are the ones who can make it prestigious to serve on your board. Are they reposting things that you post or that are posted for the program on events, on activities that are going on? Are they resharing when they're in their Kiwanis Club or Optimus or Rotary? Are they talking about their involvement in Main Street so that people want to get involved and engaged in the program? When Lawrenceburg puts out their annual report every year, and I've used this as an example in many places across the country to show the reasons why working with Main Street and the work that you're doing is bringing direct economic gains for your community. So that's really important. So can we use social media to better help with leadership development? Frankfurt, hats off to you with all the great logos at the top of your Facebook page. Loved seeing that. And I wanted to make sure that actually, I'm going to do one more slide here, or advance. What percentage of your posts on your social media are about businesses and organization activities versus what you share about your Main Street program organization? So I went to several of your Facebook pages. I didn't check Instagram or Twitter. Facebook is easier to do, but I saw very few posts that give a shout out to your board leadership, that give a shout out to the staff, that show pictures of your board going through its strategic planning process, or that you took pictures of them at an Indiana Main Street training to show that this is a benefit we get for being within the program. So I'm challenging you all to go back to look at your posts, and if we're not promoting our program, we're sort of missing the opportunity to plan for better leadership succession, because we have to educate the community that it's not just about the events or promoting that the restaurant down the street has a really good deal this week. We have to talk about our organization. Yeah, it's not exciting when your Economic Vitality Committee is looking at that ESRI data that was provided as part of your transformation strategy visit. But what a great picture and opportunity to educate the community and the public about the volunteers you have and the analysis work they have to do in order to make all the other things happen in the downtown. So step up what we're doing with social media to use that as a promotion tool for leadership development. So how will you cultivate the leaders that are coming up? I already talked about what specific skill sets you need. And there might be challenges, in finding the right people, but, who should be on your list? And my board, when I was an executive director, went through that every year. We just said, well, we have 3 people we know who have to rotate off. What do we need for that skill set? And then we brainstormed lists of names to uh, suggest and have that conversation. Through the accreditation process, we had the board matrix there. This is a great tool for you to use. We want to see more diversity on our boards, but if you just put their names at the top and start to check things off, you can see if you're missing younger people or older people, whether you have ethnic diversity, whether they're representing, the broad scope of stakeholders within your community. It also can capture their skills and interests, any personal qualities. This is one I grabbed from Michigan. And also community connections. They might be in 2 civic organizations and they serve on the city council and they're on the county board and they might be on the school board. Those are important people. The busy people always have time to serve on Main Street, but do this process to understand what you need on your board. And just a warning here about choosing people just like you stifles your organization's growth. Sometimes we don't want to have a nominating committee, and then we're all sitting around with our friends at the board meeting, and someone says, well, I know my friend Mary Sue or the business right next to me would like to be on the board. Look for that diversity. You need different perspectives on your board. And again, just be an inclusive organization through your programming and through representation. We emphasize that a lot in looking at the census data for your communities and making sure that that is represented within your organization as well. And at the committee level is really where you're going to start to cultivate the leaders for your organization. The committees are really the backbone. They're the vehicle that your board uses to actually implement the projects, and they provide that opportunity for volunteers to get engaged and more engaged in your program. And it helps your partners to work together to help accomplish common goals. And the key thing that we're looking for is that through your committees is where we're developing the leaders for your board and going forward. Where do we find volunteers? I've shared this document with many of your programs before, but this is just an exercise sheet that you can go through with your board of directors, with your committees. It's that whole brainstorming process of thinking about people beyond the typical people you think of to bring community or to bring new volunteers to the program. And some of the questions that are on there are just name an employee from one of your event's major sponsors. Name a former officer of another civic organization. Name a church leader. name a former city councilor. It really just stretches everybody's mind into thinking about who can we get engaged in our program, because most of the time I come to communities, you all say we need more volunteers, but you've never put a plan in place to actually go get more volunteers. So that's why we need to have organization committees. It shouldn't just fall on the responsibility of the executive director to do that. So this is a real simple exercise. I've done it with communities where they have come up with 100 unique names of people who have not previously been engaged in Main Street. And now we have a plan because we know what skills we need. We're going to go out and ask those people to get involved because we could really use their skill sets. Even promoting that through social media as well. This one's from Tucumcari, New Mexico, where they say many hands make light work. So get more people engaged in your program. As part of your onboarding process for board members, Mary Means, who is the mother of Main Street, wrote this book a while back. You should buy more copies of it or have one in your office that you can distribute to people for them to understand Main Street. But a key part of that getting effective leadership is to get people on board and up to speed. I always held my orientation for board members the month before they came onto the board as active members. So they didn't push their chairs back and sit back waiting to learn things. I wanted them to fully know as much about the organization before they came to their first meeting so they could participate right off the bat. So what are those things? You know, there's a list there to the side of the operating documents of the board that they need to have so that they can be fully involved and engaged in the program. So, you know, what can they all do to help you? You want to also have plans for people who might be retiring to go off the board and what they might do as well. So I'd ask that question about how far out your officers are known. I think it's great to have a 2 to 3 year plan. Rotary is really good about that. They have their first vice president, second vice president. It disturbs me when I come into a community and the vice president says, "Oh, no, I never agreed to be the president of the organization." Oh my gosh, then we're going to have a real void because the next election we have to fill the presidency and the vice presidency. So you want to make sure, again, that people know that you're going to hopefully get them up in an officer position as they go through. So staff transition, that's what was all about board development. But you can think about staff transition. Consider that the executive director just gave their notice and they're going to be gone in 30 days. So what are your first steps and how much time do you think it'll take to replace your ED? It's actually longer than you probably think. You know, an ED giving a 2-week notice means you're probably going to go at least 6 to 8 weeks without an executive director. So, you know, these are all the things, and I know executive directors, you know, all of these things is what an executive director's job can be like. If they do all of that, then they're the perfect Main Street manager. But it's important for the board to understand all the tasks and responsibilities that you have to be able to, you know, manage the program, share in the opportunities and development of the program, envision sort of the bigger goals and gains. It's not just about the work we're doing this year, but the longevity of our program. But the executive director is really the face of the organization to build the vision, the value, keep the board on track, and really be that person who sets an example through motivation and inspiring others. And Main Street programs need to invest in the professional development of their executive directors. So, what are the things that you're most concerned about if your executive director was wrong or is gone? not wrong, is gone. So the executive director might say, here's the things I'm worried about, and the board might say, here are the things I'm worried about. Both opinions or both options need to be taken into account. So we have to know what secrets the executive director holds. Where are the keys to your office? Who has the passwords to the computer? And where are all the records stored? Who needs to be on the plan to assure that no lapse happens with the program? If it's a planned departure, again, here's the timing. If you know someone is leaving, the executive director tells the board chair, I'm leaving. We look at in the second week, we ought to be looking at that succession plan. The executive director is trying to get everything lined up with transitioning. And then the board has to put into play the whole plan for bringing on a new executive director, how to introduce them to the community. Well, it starts with reviewing the job description and all of that and advertising. So it's a long stretch where a community could be without an executive director. So if Heather, you're on the call, welcome. I saw that you're a brand new executive director, but the reason that your boards need to know it's important to retain your staff and treat them well is because it costs money to bring on somebody new. Cost of hiring, advertising, the cost of onboarding and getting them trained and up to speed. There's a loss of productivity that it might take a year or two for the new executive director to reach the same level of productivity as your old executive director, and it costs more than money as well. There's a loss of momentum for the program, so there's an opportunity cost that some things aren't going to get done, even if it's just social media posts and keeping events on track. It might also mean a loss of credibility and confidence for your program and your community. If the position turns over too often, they'll say, what's wrong with that organization? And there's a loss of the relationships that the executive director has had with partners, city volunteers, funders, sponsors. All of those relationships are lost. And for succession planning, it's key that the board assure that they're paying their executive director well, because you don't want to lose all these things if there is transition with the leadership in the executive director position. Think about your plan. Maybe you've got, some places do. They say, well, if our executive director left, we have an interim person who could step in. So do we have that information? What are those things that we want to have in place? Would Main Street be able to survive a decline in income? Maybe, there's not going to be the executive director to run the fundraising, or they lost sponsorships. So we have to ask these questions and be able to answer them in our succession plan. Will we lose that institutional knowledge? Is the level of work that the executive director and the responsibility they have realistic? Or have they, in good faith, taken on too much responsibility at the expense of developing other staff and volunteers, and they've taken on too much? So I'm always scared about programs where the executive director is doing everything. And then there's the chance, if any of you have additional staff, if the executive director leaves, the support staff might leave with them as well. So just preparing for an emergency, I say review your job description of your executive director annually. Think about the expertises that you have and whether or not that would turn over. Leadership traits that you don't want. This is for executive directors and board members as well, is that we really want to be strategic about that transition time. Again, just looking at, I'm not going to go through this slide extensively, but really just making sure your policies and procedures are in place. So should you move to an interim executive director or you transition to a new one, that everyone knows how decisions get made and take care of the organization. So with that staff succession, again, make the job doable for somebody coming in afterwards. go through that job description every year, which you should be doing when you analyze their job performance and do their review for executive directors every year. And again, what would be the top priorities coming from staff that is leaving? So next steps, this is my last slide. Get the basics checked off. Start your succession plan with who's got keys for the office, where are the computer passwords, who has access to our social media, our websites, those very things that could lock you out of any knowledge of your organization. You need to have those things available, and hopefully you all do now. But make a list of the things that need to be documented and hand off to the officers annually. That's a responsibility of the executive director. Why do we require written work plans? For this very thing, because at least project wise things are captured in a work plan. But the executive director, you need to make sure that people know that where they have access to the things that you have access to. Form a nominating committee if you don't have one that will focus this next year on leadership succession, from the committee level to the board level, to also enhancing the staff, making sure you have professional development, make sure you're being paid well. Keep up the annual evaluations of the executive director. Again, that should happen annually. Board members should ask them questions to provide feedback on board performance. Are there underperforming board members we need to address? And then making that investment of planning time dedicated to leadership development, investing in that professional development line item that you have in your budgets. So now I want to hear from you. I put a slide in here. You can type this in. You can come off speaker and talk with us. What is one thing that you'll do or address or share with your board when you hold your next board meeting based on what you heard in this webinar today? Is there something that you saw that you went, wow, we never thought about doing this? Or maybe you have had it in place and you need to go in and refresh it or update it. But what's one thing you'll do or address or share with your board when you hold your next board meeting? And I always say, do this while the iron is hot. Don't wait 6 months to talk about succession planning with your board now that you've had this presentation today. I'm going to show that slide just to remind you that Birmingham is coming up, and I hope I'll see many of you there. And if there are any board members listening or you have board members coming, I'm going to be doing the board member roundtable on Monday, May 6th, 2:45 to 4:45. So Abby, I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah. So I did see, Brian, you had your hand up. Do you still want to say something?
Yeah, sorry. I was
Okay.
trying to
No, you're
make sure
fine.
I kept that up. Yeah, I was just going to say I'm here with Sarah, our executive director, and on behalf of Destination Huntingburg. And the big takeaway for us is just really doing a lot more formal expectation setting across the board on all these things. Because, you go through over time, and a lot of times you don't always inject that. Here are the expectations. Here are the other details and things that we need to work on as a board in terms of time limits and everything else. So I think just making sure there's a little bit more of a framework around expectations is something we're going to share with our board.
Great. And I think you'll benefit from it. So, as I said, whenever we had, that turnover and we needed to look at new board members, when we did tell them what our expectations were, they came through to perform. My board chairs turned over every year because they only wanted it to be a 1-year commitment. They were ready. Once in a while, somebody would do 2 years, but that was very rare. But that's what they wanted, and everybody took their turn, and they knew the rest of the board was there to support them. Being chair just meant they were leading the meeting. And it was just wonderful for everybody. And when we decided to have our first strategic planning session, they wanted to have a waiting list of people ready to serve on our board. And I thought, we could do that. And within 3-4 weeks, we had 6 people on a waiting list ready to come onto our board when openings happened. And that was something very specific my board wanted to have in place. And, when my electrical contractor, it was his turn to be the chair. I thought, oh, how's this going to go? He did fantastic. He just knew that he wanted to come in and meet with me the day before our board meeting. We'd go through the agenda. I'd tell him, here's what action items are coming up. And he did a fabulous job, just like everybody else did as the board chair. But that way, one person doesn't stay in power too long. Or if someone has been your board chair for 3 to 5 years, no one wants to follow that person because they also think they'll have to be chair for 3 to 5 years. So good to set those policies. What else did you learn? Go ahead.
So it looks like in the chat, Lexi mentioned that the sheet where you can brainstorm possible people to bring in, the one that you shared earlier, she said it's officially the #1 agenda item for their next meeting. So that's good.
That's a good one. You give everybody time, like about 10 minutes of quiet time. They fill it out by themselves, and they can't write the same name on more than one line, but it should be somebody who's not engaged. And then you've got this great list of names that you can now go, hey, that Economic Vitality Committee, Design Committee, or that event, and you can cultivate your leaders that way. Good job.
And then Anne said, talk to the board about establishing a nominating committee with expectations listed out.
I'd also note too, I think nominatings are a good chance for you to engage other volunteers. I like nominating committees to be made up of no more than 2 board members and 2 people from the outside. And the nominating committee's responsibilities vary from time to time. They might be charged with filling vacancies, talking to board members whose terms are rolling over, but they also may be preparing the slate of officers for the annual meeting. And if they're doing that, no one who is up for office should be serving on the nominating committee. So it gives you that chance to go get the bank president or somebody from, a corporation in town, because it's an ad hoc committee that only has to meet when there's a need. So it's a good way to get them engaged and get new ideas on people to pull in.
Mm-hmm. That's all I'm seeing in the chat. Does anyone else have any action items that they're walking away with? And unmute or throw it in the chat.
I'm going to ask a question out loud and you can maybe, Kathy, what are your thoughts on elected officials serving on the board? I think elected officials are great on a board as ex officio non-voting members. That's my preferred spot for them. Many of you are getting funding from your city, so if they have to recuse themselves from voting because they're on your board, and they're your biggest supporter, you don't want that to have happen, right? But also there are times when Main Street and city might have differing opinions on a particular topic. I had that come up when our downtown was going to be bypassed with a new highway. And the DOT said, where do you want the exit? And we said, well, the highway used to come right into downtown, so we need the exit as close to downtown as possible. Well, the city had all this land out in the industrial park that they said, no, we want it 5 miles up this way because it's going to enhance the sale of that land and industry that can grow in the community. Both arguments were sound, but Main Street voted to endorse the exit by downtown, and the city endorsed the exit for the industrial park. So the city wouldn't have been able to vote on that particular issue. But because we had such a close relationship and we had a lot of advocacy power, we ended up getting both. versus being enemies and saying that exit 5 miles out is absolutely going to kill downtown. We came up with getting both, so it was nice. But I think ex officio is probably a good role for them. Because they probably don't have as much time to be as engaged with the board, and they're not going to probably help you with fundraising. They might have, just by virtue of their positions, they might not be able to be fully engaged with the board. But we always had our mayor and our city planner as ex officio members of our board, and they came quite often. And we asked them to give updates. And so it's a really important relationship.
Okay. Well, I'm not seeing anything else, and I know it's 10:59, so I want to be mindful of everyone's time, but thank you so much, Kathy. I learned even a lot just from hearing and being reminded of some of these things, so this is really, really helpful. I hope it was helpful to all of you as well. I know this is something that, it takes some work to get these things implemented, but I would say make it a priority, because to be able to do the rest of the amazing things that you guys do, this type of stuff needs to be in place for you to continue to do and have the impact that you are having. So thanks, everyone. We'll hopefully talk to and see you soon, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Good luck with your succession planning.
Bye.
Bye-bye.